I'm going to keep this straightforward because I know how many times you've watched a hype-filled intro and then wondered if the gear actually lives up to the promise. If you've been on the fence about whether a high-end rotary laser is worth the investment, this review is for you. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a few days setting up the Leica Geosystems Rugby 610 on a residential job site, a small commercial grading project, and even tested it on a weekend deck building project, so I can tell you what it really feels like to use it day to day and where the money really goes. First, let's talk about the problem most of us face when we start looking at rotary lasers. The market is crowded with cheap models that claim up to 100 range and 1/8 inch ch accuracy, but in practice they drift, they die after a few hours, and they can't take a splash of rain. On the other end, the premium units promise long range and ruggedness, yet they often come with a steep price tag and a learning curve that can make a weekend hobbyist feel out of depth. The risk is simple. You either overpay for features you'll never use, or you end up with a laser that quits mid-project and leaves you redoing layout work. That's why the category itself matters. A rotary laser is a tool you use to establish a level reference line that spins 360 degrees around a single point. In construction, you'll use it for setting floor slabs, grading driveways, aligning walls, or even for landscape grading where you need a consistent slope over a large area. In those scenarios, two things dominate the decision: how far the beam can be read reliably, and how consistently it stays level without you having to keep readjusting it. The Leica Rugby 610 checks both boxes, but it does so in a way that's easy to verify on the job. The first thing I noticed is the range. With the optional RE120 receiver, you can actually pick up the laser signal out to 600 feet. That's roughly half a mile. In a real-world sense, that meant I could set the laser on the far edge of a 2-acre lot, walk to the opposite side, and still see a clean, steady line on the receiver's LCD without having to climb a ladder or reposition the unit. For a contractor who needs to lay out a foundation for a small commercial building, that eliminates at least 3 trips back and forth that you'd normally make with a shorter-range laser. Accuracy is the next practical metric. Leica lists it as 3/32 of an inch at 100 feet, which translates to about 2.4 millimeters. In my grading test, I laid out a 5% slope over a 30-foot run and measured the height at the far end with a digital level. The deviation was well within a millimeter, which is more than enough for most building codes that allow a 1/8 inch ch variance for interior floors. If you're doing high-precision work like setting a concrete slab for a kitchen island where a tiny tilt can affect cabinet doors, that level of accuracy really shows up. Now, durability. The Rugby 610 is rated IP67, meaning it can handle a full submersion for up to 30 minutes and is dust-tight. I deliberately sprayed the unit with a garden hose on a hot summer day to see if the optics would fog or the electronics hiccup. Nothing happened. The laser stayed on. The self-leveling mechanism kept humming, and the display remained clear. The operating temperature range of 14°F to 122°F also means you can run it in a chilly early morning site or in the peak of a July afternoon without worrying about a thermal shutdown. Those are not just specs on a sheet, they're the kind of reliability you notice when you're out on a job site and the weather decides to change on a whim. Battery life is another hidden cost factor that most reviewers gloss over. The Rugby 610 claims up to 60 hours of continuous operation on a single charge. In practice, I ran it for a full 8-hour workday, turned it off, and it still had roughly 45 hours left. Even with the RE120 receiver attached and the laser constantly rotating, I could count on it to last through a multi-day project without needing a spare battery pack. For a crew that rents equipment, that translates into fewer rental days and lower overall cost. All these strengths are compelling, but the unit isn't without trade-offs. The self-leveling range is 5 degrees. That sounds generous until you try to set the laser on a very uneven surface, say, a gravel driveway that's already sloped. If the initial tilt exceeds that 5-degree envelope, the unit won't level on its own, and you'll have to manually adjust the mount or use a tripod with a leveling base. It's a small step, but it adds a little extra time in the field if you're working on a rough terrain. Another practical consideration is the need for the RE120 receiver to actually reach that 2,600-foot claim. The laser itself will emit a signal,